We have a great day, half day ahead of us. I'm Marta Ceroni, Executive Director of the Donella Meadows Institute. We are a small educational nonprofit in Norwich, and we are continuing the tradition of Donella Meadows in trying to foster systems approaches and systems thinking, especially regarding the economy, this black hole that means everything or nothing. Starting from very fundamental building blocks like ownership, or how do we own things as we think of alternatives and new models in the economy. So today we are very excited to work with our friends and neighbors in Norwich Clean Yield Asset Management. And we also are very happy to have our panels and keynote speaker today. Eric Becker from Clean Yield will provide a little bit more detail about that. I just wanted to mention that today's event is part of New Economy Week, that not only at BMI and our institute, but in other organizations across Vermont, this important issue of ownership is really becoming fundamental as we rethink the future of Vermont's economy. So we are personally involved in designing such an initiative. So we are really privileged to have experts here, expertise at the tables, at the panels, and we want to build some very important questions that can guide us forward as we design programs and initiatives in Vermont. So I thank you all, and I would like to give the word to Eric to continue on. Thanks all for coming.
Thanks, Marta. I'm Eric Becker. I'm a partner with Clean Yield Asset Management in Norwich, and I'm really thrilled to be able to co-host this event with Donella Meadows Institute. We've been neighbors for quite a while, but in Norwich, and finally figured out a way to collaborate, which is great because they really provide context for a lot of the work we do in terms of local investing, particularly in the sustainable food system that we're trying to support. And they do really important work in terms of the thinking behind the long-term strategy of how to help relocalize our economy and build resilience. So it's great to finally be able to collaborate. So with that, I'd like to introduce Marjorie Kelly, who I've known for a long time. I've been in social investing for a bit over 20 years. I should say Clean Yield, if you don't know, manages money for high net worth individuals and families. All of our accounts are socially and environmentally screened, and we do a lot of local investing as well, as much as we're able to. So I've been involved in social investing for more than 20 years and have was a reader way back when of Business Ethics magazine, which Marjorie founded, published, and edited. So I have her portrait photograph from, I think, the inside cover. It's kind of seared into my brain, so she'll always look like that. It really doesn't look much different than she did 20 years ago. Marjorie's Senior Fellow and Director of Special Projects with the Democracy Collaborative. Her recent book, Owning Our Future, The Emerging Ownership Revolution, which came out in 2012, won a Nautilus Book Award. And previously she was a fellow at TELUS Institute, and as I mentioned, a long history with Business Ethics magazine. And for 5 years was a lead consultant on the Ford Foundation's WealthWorks initiative, and I'm really anxious to hear what she has to say this morning to frame this whole event. So Marjorie, take it away.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Marta. It's a treat to be here today. It's a wonderful time to come to Vermont. I drove from Boston. Wonderful, great drive. So Vermont is such an epicenter of the new economy, I think, as you know. So it's a tremendously fruitful place. And I think there's very few places who understand the importance of relocalizing the economy like Vermont does. But let me just start with a couple of stories. I've been around corporate social responsibility and this kind of area for more years than I think now, more than 20. And And I've really come to see how important ownership is. And so let me start with a couple of stories. I mean, why does ownership matter? I mean, we know we need a green economy. We know we need to solve climate change. Does it really matter who owns it all? So let me start with just a couple of stories. One has to do with New Orleans. Now, there's a great company headquartered in New Orleans. At one time headquartered there. It was called Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. Now, this is a big chain of steakhouses. At one time, it was owned by Ruth. And there was a time when a hurricane hit New Orleans. And Ruth found herself with freezers full of rapidly thawing, very expensive steaks. And she said, what shall I do with these things? So she set up grills out in the streets, started grilling the steaks and gave them away free to rescue workers. You know, she responded. She owned the company. She responded in a way that she cared about her community. 2005, Ruth's Chris Steakhouse went public, which means its ownership shares now trade in public stock markets. Later in 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. How did the new CEO respond? Well, he wasn't out grilling steaks. He closed the doors and he moved out of town. Because he knew that his responsibility was not to the community. His responsibility was to the stock market, and he had to get his earnings up quarter after quarter, and nothing else really mattered. So and Ruth's family, by the way, was furious. This had been a locally owned company. They didn't want to see this change of mission that occurred. And we often don't see it coming. Another example, in Beverly Cooperative Bank. This is a small bank in my hometown, Salem, Massachusetts. There's like 4 branches. I could ride to them all on my bike. And I went to visit the CEO of this bank after the 2008 crisis. I wanted to know how he was doing. We know that banks had made terrible mortgages, had to be bailed out, things were in a crisis. And when I talked to Beverly Cooperative Bank, and he said, you know, I've made 1,000 mortgages in the last 8 years, and about 10 have gone bad. Very, very low default rate. The reason? He said, I'm here to serve my community. This is a bank owned by its depositors. Its purpose is not to maximize profits. Its purpose is to make good loans that will help people stay in their homes. So lo and behold, he made good loans, and they held up. And he said, you know, if a loan is in trouble, you can come find me. You can talk to me. I'm the president of the bank. He said, good luck finding the president of the Bank of America to talk to. So, I mean, and this is a story that was missed. I write about it in Owning Our Future. Cooperative banks, credit unions, community development financial institutions, they were making mortgages, many of them to low-income people. Those mortgages did not go bad at the rate that the big banks' mortgages did. So there's a discernible difference between ownership rooted in community behaves differently. This is a story that we don't hear enough about, but the evidence is there. So another story, and this is South Mountain Company. Some of you may know John Abrams. His book is back there on the table. Company we keep. He's a great company. Now, South Mountain Company is 100% employee-owned. It's the only company I have found that has consciously decided on slow growth. I'm sure there are others. This is just a story that I happen to know about. I mean, you know, here we are. The Dinello Meadows Institute is sponsoring this event. Dinello Meadows was a brilliant systems theorist who was the first to talk about the limits to growth. We can't grow forever on this finite planet. Publicly traded companies need to grow quarter after quarter for their earnings to go up. So a different kind of ownership structure allows a different approach to ownership. At South Mountain Company, this is a green design build company in Massachusetts, and they were growing rapidly. They build net zero houses and sustainable homes, and they were feeling all of the pains of rapid growth, and so they held a meeting. They brought all the employees together in a room, and they gave them each a sticky dot, and they put a chart on the wall. The line down the middle said, maintain present size. To the left said, shrink. To the right said, grow rapidly. I said, put your dot. What do you think we ought to do? People put their dots up there, and when they stepped back, they saw most of the dots clustered toward the middle. So they wanted to slow down, maintain present size, and that's what they did. They turned down contracts. They began to consciously manage growth. Now, why did that happen? Because those employees own the company. They had a say. Generally, employees don't have a say about the purpose of a company. So it was employee ownership and a rolling governance that allowed them to have this say. One more quick story, and that is of John Lewis Partnership. When I was writing Owning Our Future, I wanted to travel around both the US and Europe and say, where are the existing companies that have a different kind of purpose? And there's some big companies. And so I had heard about John Lewis Partnership. It's about $4 billion, and that's billion with a B, revenue. It's the largest department store chain in the United Kingdom. They have about 24 department stores, 200 grocery stores. It's 100% employee owned. If you go to their website, you'll see that their stated purpose is to serve employee happiness. I had never seen, it's odd that should be odd, actually. But there it was. Now, I want to see, well, can that be real? As a journalist for many years, I work as a consultant researcher now, but I was a business and financial journalist for many years. I have a pretty good nose for BS. And so I went to see them, and I thought, it seems pretty real. I met a woman, a clerk on the store of a grocery store, said she was taking her first vacation in 20 years because she'd gotten a bonus that year. She just started working there. They give more than 50% of profits directly handed out in checks to employees at the end of the year. She got a bonus of about 9 weeks' pay that year. So this is serious. This is a place where people who work stocking shelves at a department store have a pension. They get pretty ordinary market level wages, but they have pensions and they get profit sharing. They also have a voice in governance, so they directly elect a partnership council. So these are companies that behave differently. They make good mortgages, they serve employee happiness, they go for slow growth, serve the community. These are the kinds of things that are possible and encouraged when you have ownership that is locally rooted, when you have ownership that is broadly held. Now, I like to say that there's two kinds of ownership. There's two sort of broad schools of ownership. The one that we know the best, we can call extractive. It's about extracting maximum profits. That's its purpose. It sort of ignores everything else. It's been pretty good at that, and that was a design that has served us well for a long time. It's tending to overshoot now when we see banks extracting too much out of their communities, making bad mortgages because it makes them a profit. That's when we veered into extractive behavior. There's another kind of ownership, which I call generative. It's life-serving. And we can draw a big circle around cooperatives and employee ownership and municipal ownership and a state bank like Bank of North Dakota. There's a lot of different forms. You can call it biodiversity. We don't have a monoculture of ownership designs in generative ownership. We have a diversity of designs appropriate for different purposes. But what they all have in common is living purposes at their core. The purpose is not to make as much profit as possible. Most of them are profit-making, but they're not profit-maximizing. Their aim is to build good homes, help people buy homes, sell clothing, living purposes. I have, for the last 2 years or so, I joined the Democracy Collaboratives. We have done a fair amount of work in Cleveland. Some of you may have heard of it. We worked with the Cleveland Foundation to start the Evergreen Cooperatives. It's a series of three, so far, 3 employee-owned cooperatives. They're supported by an anchor institution, demand, and were started with the help of a local foundation. So this is the next stage of my work, and I think it's the next stage of I see it as an emerging new stage of new economy work. So we're going beyond individual enterprises to look at whole ecosystems of support. And I think Vermont is a good example of this. I mean, how do you, first of all, if ownership matters, if we need a new kind of economy, and if it takes the form of different kinds of social architectures, how do we get from here to there? How do we begin to have more different kinds of enterprises, a different kind of architecture for our economy? Well, one of the ways to do it is to create support systems, financing systems. Oftentimes, city planning will be at the table, community foundations. We have a new report coming out in November looking at the role of community foundations in doing this work, because they're inherently place-based and are beginning to get involved in this work. In Vermont, there is a lot of ecosystem support here. There's the Vermont Employee Ownership Center. There's the Vermont Community Foundation, which has a policy of investing 5% of all of its assets locally, including, you might know, community foundations work by having donor-advised funds. So you can place your own funds, philanthropic funds there, and then give them out over time. Well, their policy is that even 5% of donor-advised funds are invested locally, and donors love this. Vermont also has Vermont Business for Social Responsibility. And places like Webster and Vermont Employee Ownership Center, those are pretty rare. I want you to appreciate how, what gems these are. The Donella Meadows Institute is another one. There's some great companies in this state, and we'll be hearing from Paul Millman at Chroma Technology, one of our great favorites in business ethics. We gave them a Business Ethics Award many years ago. Other great companies, they're employee-owned. Gardner Supply, King Arthur Flour, 7th Generation, Ben & Jerry's, and Clean Yield itself. Clean Yield is a benefit corporation. Some of you may know about that, a B Corp, companies that charter and say in their founding documents, we want to serve public benefit. So that's another piece of an ecosystem of support, is the structure of benefit corporations. So we're in this business of building a new economy and creating the support structures that will make it happen and allow it to thrive. So we want to talk today about who owns Vermont. And there's a great handout here that I hope you all picked up. I want to just run through a little bit of this because, first of all, I want to say I think this is a brilliant question, who owns Vermont? And I really salute Donella Meadows Institute and Clean Yield for posing this question, because I think it's, in 3 words, it really sums up the challenge that we face, and I think the opportunity that we face. As Eric said, how do we relocalize the economy? How do we build in resilience? At the same time that we need to make an energy transition, a green transition, we need to make an ownership transition. It's not likely that we're going to survive well on this planet 100 years from now, 200 years from now, if we're dominated by major corporations intent solely on earnings growth quarter after quarter. I don't think that's the structure that's going to carry us into a sustainable future. So we're now creating the seeds of a different kind of future, and these seeds are sometimes farther along than we realize. So let's just run through a few of the things here that Marta has put together here for us. The land in Vermont, ownership applies to a whole lot of things. It's not just enterprises. Land, 22% of Vermont's private land is owned by non-residents. And that actually is a slight a reduction. So things are moving gently in the right direction. It was about 1% higher a year or 2 ago. About one out of 3 of Vermont farmers, they rent part or all of the land that they rely on for their livelihood. Forests, there's some very good news. More than 80% of Vermont forests are owned by individuals and families. Only 1% of Vermont's forests are owned by business. Electrical utilities, 70%, this is a really interesting one that you all have dug up. 70% of Vermont's electrical utilities are owned by a single company in Quebec, Gaz Metro. Hydropower, 50% of it is owned by Ontario's TransCanada, and the power that they make doesn't go to Vermont, it goes to other places. So, can we begin to control our energy economy? Having some control over the companies that produce the energy is really critical. One of the things we'll be talking about today is the power of community wind, community solar. As we make a transition from one kind of energy economy to another, this is a major civilizational transition, a question comes up: who's going to own? Who's going to own that new infrastructure? This is the point in which great wealth is created. There's an opportunity to change how wealth is distributed, let me put it that way. We saw this with the Industrial Revolution. Ford, Rockefeller, Carnegie. That money all came from the Industrial Revolution, from owning the early infrastructure of the fossil fuel economy. So as we move into a green energy economy, who's going to own it? This is a question that we need to be talking about much more than we do, and there's some good work going on here in Vermont on that question. Employee-owned companies, there are 32 of those in Vermont. Nationwide, there are 11,000. We think at the Democracy Collaborative, we see a great potential for a huge ownership transition with employee owners as baby boom entrepreneurs age and want to sell or retire. Where are those companies going to go? This is, again, it's a historic turning point. Are they going to sell to public markets? Are they going to sell to somebody out of state? Are they going to maybe sell to their employees? And how can we make that be a major option for exiting owners? Cooperative. There's 129 cooperative businesses in Vermont, including 31 credit unions, 18 grocery co-ops. Nationwide, there are 30,000 co-ops. It might be interesting to know that the assets held by cooperatives are $3.1 trillion. So this is a substantial part of the economy that is often not recognized. I mean, it's no accident that the major business journal in our country is called the Wall Street Journal. What do we hear every night? We hear the rise and fall of the Dow Jones Industrial Average. It's all about Wall Street. But the cooperatives are a pretty substantial part of the economy. We just don't hear about them. In terms of money, 64% of the deposits in Vermont banks are held in banks that are owned by outsiders. They're outside Vermont. Interestingly, that percent is only 23% for North Dakota. So, in other words, the proportion is flipped around in North Dakota. Most deposits are held locally. And the reason is, North Dakota has the Bank of North Dakota. It's the only state-owned bank in the country, and it acts as a kind of a mini Federal Reserve that holds deposits for the state, and it helps to support locally owned banks throughout Vermont. There are more locally owned banks in Vermont than any other state because it has this support. I'm sorry, North Dakota, thank you. So it really supports the banking infrastructure there, the local banking infrastructure. And Bank of North Dakota last year made about $100 million in profit. So instead of that profit leaving the state and going to absentee owners, it stays in the state and can be used to enrich the state. Now here in Vermont, Vermonters for a New Economy did a study. They said a state bank could create 2,500 jobs, and it could save Vermont about $100 million in capital spending. So it's, and we'll be talking about that today with our panel, the potential for a state bank.